Hi everyone, my name is Joop. I am the co-founder and CEO of Remote. That's remote.com. And today I want to talk a little bit about remote first, remote friendly, uh, and how to be a good leader in a hybrid team or in a remote team. And actually, I'm already sort of giving away the point of this, which is if you are running a team that is either partially remote, fully remote, or anywhere in between, right? If you're running a hybrid team, you have to essentially act as if you're fully remote at all times. And the reason for that is really, really simple. Because the moment one person is remote, you want to make sure that you're inclusive to having that person be part of the team. They should have access to information. They should be able to communicate with the rest of the team. And so one of the simplest ways to start thinking about, like, how should I run my team? Should I think about my team as like a pure remote team, a remote first team, or a remote friendly team, is to just say, well, as long as there's one person working remotely, one person that's not in the present with us, together with us in the office, we all have to act as if we are working remotely. And that means that independent of your setup, whether you're hybrid, fully remote or not, your leadership style should basically always be the same. So that's both a good thing because there's one thing I can tell you that applies to all of these situations, and it's a bad thing because you have to think about these things. You have to think about, how can I effectively lead while all or just a part of my team is working remote. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to give you 3 high-level tips, and I walk through all 3 of them on, like, how to be a better leader in this kind of hybrid setups. Um, and to start off, what I have to say is that this is important because in a remote setting, you don't get anything for free, right? When you are in an office, you get a lot for free because you see each other in person, and a lot can be covered by just walking up to someone and asking them, how are you, how's work, etc. You don't get anything for free in a remote setting, so it's very important that you're very intentional about this. So let's walk through the 3 points that I have. The first one is that you must lead with trust. And it seems like a very obvious thing to say, but I'm going to specify it. The last thing you want in a remote organization is to feel like you're constantly being observed. You also don't constantly want to feel like someone is checking on you. And so, as a leader, you can resolve this by leading with trust. And it starts by truly giving ownership to individuals and then letting them run with that, right? You give someone a clear ownership of something, whatever that may be, and then you make sure you set clear and specific expectations. Because if you do that, then the subsequent steps are you back off as a leader. You give someone the space and the freedom to execute their work. That immediately enables them to do the work in their own time at whatever location they want, without feeling the need to constantly check in with you, without you feeling the need to constantly check in with them. So this is it's a really high level advice, but it's very practical, and especially in a remote organization where you want to avoid as much as possible to have regular check-ins with people, or check-ins that require both people to be in the same time in the same place. And then whenever you have a moment to have a one-on-one with someone, right, through a Zoom call or in person, rather than spending that time reviewing the actual work, you should spend that time to focus on the person itself, right? Because the work can be reviewed while neither of you is online, right? Like, someone can produce a piece of output, and you can review that whether they are working right now, whether they are in the office or not. So if you do spend one-on-one time with someone, be that on a Zoom call, be that actually in person together at the office, spend time focusing on the person. How are they doing? Are they doing well in their career? What are the next steps? What are their plans? What are their worries? What are their concerns? How can you coach them, rather than focusing on, is this work as it's supposed to be? That's important as well, but focusing on the work is significantly easier to do without being together at the same time in person or in a Zoom call. So that's really how you lead with trust. And then whenever you do give feedback to someone, make sure that feedback is actionable, right? One of the best tips is to immediately give feedback when it is the appropriate time to give feedback, right? If there's something good or something bad that someone did, and make that very actionable. Unactionable feedback just feels like complaining, and it's very hard to deal with. Actionable feedback Very simple trick, but it's fundamentals, and the fundamentals are very important in these kind of settings. So that's tip number one, lead with trust. Tip number two, and you might have heard this if you read anything about working remotely, which is communicating asynchronously. And I was referring to this already when I said, well, when you do have one on one meetings, when you do have time where you're together in the same place, focused on a person, the inverse of that is that whenever it is not necessary to have a quick back and forth, or when it's just about, looking at the same kind of information and having a back and forth on top of that, you can do it asynchronously. And asynchronously simply means you write it down. You're not required to schedule a moment together or happen to be together at the same time in the same place to work together or to communicate. And the best way to think about this is that the better you do it, the more you write stuff down, the more you focus on doing work in your project management tool or whatever other tool you use for your work, the less meetings you can have. And, none of us really enjoy sitting in endless long Zoom meetings. And one of the best ways to make sure that the whole organization starts doing this and to avoid the need for constantly checking in with each other is to default to public communication and information. And so that means is that if I am working on a project and I want to provide a status update, I don't provide that status update to an individual. I don't go to my manager, Jane, and say, well, Jane, this is how this project is going, but rather I update this in a public place, so a place where all of my colleagues, anybody that's interested can see it, so that at no point in time anybody has to ask me, yo, what is the status of the project? But rather they can just go to the place where all the projects are, which might be a project management tool, and see what the latest status of the project, if I made any particular decisions or if I encountered any roadblocks. All of those things should just happen there. And then if you have a question about it, you ask that in the same location, right? This is typically possible in a project management tool. You just ask, hey, Job, why did you choose to make this button blue, for example? And then lastly, and part of communicating asynchronously is to document things. So beyond just making sure your work is in public, making sure that anybody can access and view whatever decisions you're making, you also document decisions, you also document processes. So for example, you want to make sure that as an organization, your time off policy is documented somewhere. The moment that you document something, which is no effort, right? You just write down, you have paid time off. If you want to register to pay time off, this is the process that we follow. And if you need approval, this is how it goes. And this is our policy, right? You write this down in a place where everybody can see it and everybody can contribute to it as well. And it can be any sorts of tools. There's many tools for this. The moment that you do this, you immediately remove the need for anybody to ask, for example, the HR department, what are the rules around this? It's a very simple thing, but it's incredibly powerful. And many organizations have not done this yet, have not made the step to say, well, we're just going to document how we do things. And this goes for literally any department in any organization. Everybody should be documenting things, and nobody is too senior to be documenting things. I'm the CEO of a now rather large organization, and I still document things every single day. And it can be big things. This is our strategy. This is how we think about things, to very small things. If you want to schedule a meeting with me, this is what the best way to do it is. If everybody does this, you create an organization that doesn't require people to tap other people on the shoulder, to send people a Slack message asking them for information. Because the first step that everybody will start to take is, let's see if this is documented somewhere. And if you're diligent about this, less and less interferences are necessary of each other. So lead with trust, communicate asynchronously. And then the last one, and this is another one that is very tricky, and especially if you're thinking about hybrid settings, how do you build culture and how can you think about company values? And again, the moment your organization is somewhat remotely, doesn't matter in whether it's friendly or first or anything else, you have to start being incredibly intentional about this. When everybody was going to an office, culture sort of came for free, right? Because you see each other. You enter the office, you see your colleagues at the desks, you have a coffee together, you're at the water cooler, you might have lunch together. And so there's many organic moments in which you interact with your colleagues. The moment one person or everybody starts to work remotely, those all disappear. There's no more moments in which you magically encounter each other at the water cooler. And you don't necessarily have to try to find a virtual water cooler. You don't have to necessarily create those exact same moments, but you do have to be creating something that allows your organization and allows colleagues to connect with each other outside of the context of the actual work that they're doing. If you don't do that, what you end up having is either only the people in the office feel like they're bonded with each other, which makes them it creates sort of an in and an out group kind of situation, or potentially worse, people will see work as purely transactional, right? There's no emotion, there's no feeling of belonging to the organization. And so, how do you do this? And again, it's all about being very intentional about what you're doing. A very good way is to say, well, as an organization, we have these shared values and we build our organization on top of those values. For example, at Remote, we have several. The first one being kindness. We expect everybody to be kind, but we also expect people to lead through kindness, and make a point out of pointing it out when someone does it well and addressing it in private when someone doesn't do that well. And so, if you're doing a good job working asynchronously, you give people significant ownership that gives you the time that you would otherwise have spent in meetings for work now to get for people to bond together. Either they can use that time to get to know each other in person, if you have an office, for example, to go to, or even just setting up a call with each other or playing a game or doing whatever else. But you can create those moments, and they don't have to be as frequent, they don't have to be every single day. But you do have to create some sort of way for people to connect with each other out of the direct context of the actual work that they can do. And it can be all sorts of things, right? It can be very simple things like coffee chats, for example, where two people randomly get matched up in an organization to have a 30-minute or 20-minute talk with each other with no subject, no agenda, nothing else. Or maybe an icebreaker question like, what is your favorite color? Then there's two more notes that I want to make. The first one is that how do you know if you're doing a good job with this? Well, in an office culture, we tend to not measure this, but it is actually very measurable to ask people how they feel in the organization. How aligned do they feel with the values? Do they feel like they belong to the organization? Do they feel like they're included? This is not hard to do. You can send everybody a survey and evaluate those results, and then give people the opportunity to provide feedback on those forms as well, right? Say, well, give an open space. What are we not addressing? What are we missing? Use that, do that regularly, evaluate and improve your organization. And then that really leads into the last point that I want to make about this, which is that we are in a very, very, very first years of starting to work remotely in this sense. So we don't really know what is good, what is bad practice. We have a good idea, and some of the things I think the things that I mentioned today are somewhat obvious because, well, the obvious things we are doing, but other than that, what works for your organization, what works for your size of organization, we're not sure because there haven't been many examples yet for that. And so that means that there's not a set and forget kind of thing that solves your problem in a remote organization of any size, of any kind of matter. You really have to be intentional about it, and you have to continue to iterate on whatever you're doing. And that's ultimately what the real message that I want to give you. If you lead with trust, if you communicate asynchronously, and you're incredibly intentional about the values of your organization and building culture upon that, you have a good foundation for building an organization that can be remote friendly, remote first, or any other method that you want to work. But you do have to realize that this will only work through iteration, through deliberate practice, through deliberate changes over time as your organization changes and as our expectations of what makes a good organization change as well. I hope that was somewhat helpful. If it wasn't, let me know. If it was, I'd also love to hear that. You can find me at remote.com. Thank you very much.